Good afternoon. My name's Paul Hunt. I have the honor and pleasure to work on Senior Vice President Hsu's staff. I'm going to do two presentations today. The one that I normally give myself, which is heavy on export control, trade sanctions, and other federal, not necessarily academic compliance issues. And also I'm subbing today for J.R. Haywood, who is also a member of Steve's staff, and he runs the Office of Regulatory Affairs, and we'll be talking about human subjects for those of you who do survey research or clinical research, animals for laboratory use, radioisotopes, other environmental health and safety issues, and conflict of interest. So my job today is to help you stay out of trouble as new faculty members. Some of you will have backgrounds in this country and will know what I'm going to talk about totally. Others of you will have academic backgrounds outside of the United States, and some of this may be brand new. But it's a good refresher for the first group and essential for the second. The United States government has two regulatory regimes. There's actually a third one for nuclear science, but two principal ones that deal with either physical export, where you take an object, data, code, what have you, and push it offshore, and also so-called deemed exports. A deemed export is where you make a technology available to someone in the United States without it going offshore. One of the two regimes is called ITAR, which is the International Trafficking in Arms Regulation. ITAR deals with defense articles, things which are covered by the United States munitions list, and also defense services that may benefit the armed forces of a country other than the United States. And the second is EAR, which stands for Export Administration Regulation. And the EAR covers technologies which are dual use. That is, they have one use which is totally benign and acceptable, consumer-oriented or non-sensitive, industrial-oriented, and a second use which is of concern to the United States government. It is natural to assume that that concern is necessarily military or national security-oriented, and some of the dual-use technologies that are subject to the EAR do in fact fall under that heading. However, we also have technologies that are regulated under the EAR for crime control purposes, including particularly the suppression of the international narcotics trade, that are of concern because of their use in human trafficking, are of concern because of human rights exploitation. So that the classic example that everyone who lectures on this topic gives is thumb screws. You can't export thumb screws from the United States because they're used to oppress people, and the government prohibits it under the EAR. So when I say that the laws are intended to promote U.S. national security and other policy goals, the suppression of the drug trade, the suppression of chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction, the suppression of things that are used to oppress people, all of those are in the other policy goals category. Violations carry significant penalties and fines. How significant is that? The short answer is, if the government really gets mad at you for intentionally violating either ITAR or EAR, the penalty is 20 years in federal prison. So that's what I mean when I say significant. This would be a huge headache for every university in the country, Harvard and Caltech and Chicago and everybody else, as well as MSU, if it were not for the case that the US government creates a safe harbor, a way for academics, scholars to proceed without having to worry that every single thing they do might get them in trouble with ITAR or EAR. And the principal part of that safe harbor is called the fundamental research exclusion. Under law and regulation, if something is going to be openly published as fundamental research, it does not include encryption. if we have not accepted publication or citizenship restrictions, and that's in bold red for a reason, if it does not involve material that was controlled before the university got its hands on it, we can't wash it away. If we buy something that's controlled, it stays controlled. And for things which we do not make available on a limited basis. The problem with prototypes, especially for those of you who are computer programmers or other kinds of engineers or bench scientists, is that the fundamental idea in the fundamental research exclusion is if you get to pick and choose who has access to your research, the government also gets to pick and choose who gets access to your research. In order for something outside of encryption to qualify for fundamental research exclusion, it has to be devoid of picking and choosing as to who has access to it, either in terms of participation or in terms of whether it gets published or not. The problem that we have is that lots of people who want to give us money, especially corporations, but some U.S. government agencies and the state of Michigan in really random and weird cases like pavement preservation, want to tell us what we may or may not publish. And or they want to tell us what citizenships are acceptable for students or postdocs or faculty who are not U.S. citizens or U.S. permanent residents, refugees, or asylees, what citizenships are acceptable for project participation. We have a 97% solution, which is the one I'm here to sell you today, and that is just say no. Okay, we won't take the money in the majority of cases if it involves publication restrictions or citizenship restrictions. We don't want to play games in the typical laboratory and say you can come in but you cannot because the citizenship of the two individuals is different. However, there are certain cases where the Board of Trustees has authorized us to accept research funding projects with one or both of those kinds of restrictions. That's in an organization or a vehicle called the University Research Organization, or URO. But if you do, although we could take the research and perform it in the URO, all of the export control regulations that have those really nasty penalties I was talking about a moment ago apply, so that the safe harbor is the safe harbor that is stated here. We will take things that do not qualify for the safe harbor, but when we do, we have to be extremely careful. I don't know if Jamie Haberichter and Rhett Butler are here or not. If so, you could stand up. I'm not seeing them. They are the staff in the office who handle it. We also have to worry about trade sanctions. The U.S. government cares about where we interact with folks offshore. And the purpose of this slide is really to say this is not just a STEM deal. It's a deal for our attention and concern no matter what our discipline or role in the university is. So that you could be in agriculture doing an economic development project in Afghanistan or Mali or Sudan, and you have to worry about who you do business with in each of those cases. We just went through a major audit for our project in Afghanistan that the university is conducting, and the auditors fussed at us because in 4 isolated circumstances, people didn't provably check the list of forbidden actors to be sure that we were allowed to do business with them. Fortunately, the actors turned out not to be on the list, so we didn't get into a lot of trouble about it, but the auditors cited the omission. If you're involved in Dubai, for example, doing College of Business work in the United Arab Emirates, right down the street from where MSU's center is in Dubai is Bank Melli, and it's contrary to U.S. law to do business there, and if you go in and use your Visa card, the U.S. government will catch you and they will come after you and they will come after us. So you have to not do business with folks on this list. Finally, trips to Cuba are very interesting to lots of folks now that that's opened up during the Obama administration. It's retightened somewhat under the Trump administration. But Osteomed and the College of Music and the libraries and the Alumni Association have all gone to Cuba, but who you can deal with when you're there is also limited by trade sanctions. And the vice president, senior vice president for Research and Innovation Office, supports the entire university, whether research involved or not, in export control and trade sanction rules. The latest issue that you may have read about in the press is the federal concern with foreign influence in American research. And the best advice that I can give all of you as new colleagues for staying out of trouble and keeping Michigan State University out of trouble is that when a federal agency asks you, do you have grant support from overseas? Do you have business interests overseas? Do you have people who want to hire you part-time overseas? Tell them the truth. None of those things are a priori illegal. What is illegal is not telling the whole story accurately. Okay, so that if when you fill out your current and pending outside report page on your first NSF proposal or your first NIH proposal or your first Department of Energy proposal or whatever, they're going to ask you, what are all of your sources of support other than what you're asking us to pay for? Tell them the truth. That's what keeps you and the university out of difficulty on the foreign influence on research. When in doubt, we're here to help. And there is a web page that deals with this in great detail. My final slide, speaking in my own voice here, has to do with a really good rule, which is if you don't know what you're doing, or it makes you uneasy, or it's a case of first impression, you've never encountered the circumstance before, don't hesitate to ask. I've been doing administration at Michigan State University since 1985. I have seen people lose their jobs, but I have never seen a person lose his or her job because they asked, is this okay? It is safe, prudent, a benefit to yourself and a benefit to the university to ask if you're not sure, because there are lots of things that can go wrong if something is hidden or if something is not pursued. It could be safety, it could be criminality, it could involve research or fiscal misconduct. You'll hear more about research misconduct in a moment. So when in doubt, please ask. The other comment I want to make, for those of you who are just beginning as assistant professors, the odds are you have never had the duty of care to protect your own subordinates before, at least not in an academic setting. You may have if you were a supervisor in a store or something during the summer. But at the point you become a faculty member and you get your first student, could be a grad student, could be a professorial assistant, undergrad, your first postdoc, your first technician, your first person who is dependent upon you for their job and their career, you assume, as we all must, responsibility for protecting them. And so even if the information that I'm giving you today is old hat to you, you need to understand that you either have to be prepared to communicate it to your subordinates or to ask us to communicate it to your subordinates so your subordinates don't crash land their career out of ignorance. We don't want that to happen to anybody for obvious reasons. This is a plug. Thursday the 5th, the MSU FBI Academic Alliance Conference, which will address topics that I just talked about. Lunch is free. It's at the Kellogg Center, so it's actually a good lunch, and you're all welcome, but you need to sign up at the website.